because we are recording this event and we'll play it back on Moorhead Cable, and we also are streaming it, we'll be streaming it live over the internet. I don't know if you've ever been to a meeting where somebody in the back room asks a question and you hear a guy with a mic or a person with a mic answering it, you say, I wonder what the question was. Well, that's why we're going to have you come up here and make your statement or ask your question. Okay, we're ready to go. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Senator, to representatives for our district here in Minnesota for being here. This event is being sponsored by the League of Women Voters of the Red River Valley, an organization that does very, very good work in the political arena, making sure our citizens are informed and can make responsible decisions. We are hosted by Globe University, formerly known as Minnesota School of Business, and we really appreciate the facilities here. We are recording this, and it will be broadcast on Moorhead Access Cable TV, Channel 12, our government channel here in Moorhead. We are streaming it live this morning, and it will be on the website for people to look at, and check the League of Women Voters of the Red River Valley for that information. Our procedure, our process this morning, we're going to give each of the legislators a time for a short brief introductory statement. Then I see we already have some questions, which is good. And if any of you, as I said, would like to come up and make a statement or ask a question, please feel free to do that. Just let me know if you would like to come up here. Okay? Any questions? If not, we'll go on. Senator Ken Egan will be the first legislator to give an opening statement.
All right. Well, thanks, Les, and thanks for the, sorry.
You're going to have to pick up the mic and use it.
And it is on. Okay, well, thanks, Les, and thanks to everyone for coming out today on this blustery day. It's great to see a good turnout, and it shows the level of interest and concern about the issues that we're facing in this upcoming legislative session. And we just got started, so we're in the first couple of weeks of the session. There's been a lot of committees starting to meet now, going over information and laying the groundwork for a lot of the heavy lifting that needs to be done in order to grapple with the budget deficit that we're facing. And we're still in deficit. We've been kind of in deficit mode now for quite some time, for the last several years. And I think the biggest job that we have before us is to make sure that we solve this structural deficit problem, to finally solve it once and for all, not just kick the can down the road, send the problems off into the future or send them off to the local units of government, but to fix the state problems at the state level and to do it now rather than pushing the problem off onto future legislatures. That requires some tough decisions to be made. Not only do we have the deficit, we also have the school shift that needs to be paid back, an obligation that we need to fulfill. Again, there's a hole that we need to dig or to climb out of, and that is again one of the biggest things that we're going to have to accomplish. And we want to make sure we do it in a way that's fair and equitable for all regions of the state. Unfortunately, in the last several years, we've seen a disproportionate amount of the burden of balancing budgets placed on the shoulders of people in greater Minnesota. That needs to stop. We need to have a policy of shared sacrifice that shares the pain equitably across the state for solving our state's problems. That's one of the things we need to grapple with is the property tax increases that have been occurring, and they have hit our area, again, the hardest. So we need to get a handle on that. Again, instead of shifting the problems onto locals and forcing them to raise property taxes, we need to solve these problems at the state level. The flood mitigation work that needs to be done, I'm hoping that we can have a bonding bill this year. This is not traditionally the year that we do bonding bills, but this is there has been a lot of pent-up demand that's been building up over the years because we've only had partial bonding bills over the last couple of cycles. So that's another issue that we need to deal with. There's a number of other issues. I shouldn't get into them all now during the introductory phase of this, but tuition, long-term care, all of these issues are issues that are going to be very important for us in this upcoming session. So we have gotten our committee assignments. I am serving on the Capital Investment Committee and the Higher Education Committee and on the Ag and Rural Development Committee and on the Elections Committee. So Health and Human Services. So I've got 5 committees that I'm serving on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And our second speaker will be Representative Paul Marquardt.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning to everyone for coming out today. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring today. And, you know, whether or not it was Senator Keith Langseth or now Senator Kent Eakin, after the senators are done talking, there's not much more to say. They seem to say everything. I remember being with Senator Langseth for many years. But as Senator Eakin mentioned, the budget, of course, is the big news this year. And the important thing that we have to do is to make sure we do it right, where we actually solve the structural deficit. Otherwise, we're in a perpetual budget deficit where we're always behind the 8 ball. And so I know Tuesday is a day we're all really waiting for. Governor Dayton will release his budget. He has promised that he's going to do it without gimmicks, without shifts, without one-time funding, really get to the structural basis. And what I've also heard, and I'm very encouraged by, is I believe there's going to be investment in the things that we cherish the most here in rural Minnesota and the state of Minnesota, which is going to be good, sound education, good, sound higher education, and lower property taxes. I think that's what you're going to see, and I think those are the investments that are important to the quality of life here in this area. And I think it's, and I know Representative Lean's going to talk about this, but he's authored a bill to reinstate a homestead credit that will lower property taxes. And as vice chair of the Property Tax Committee, we have 2 here on higher ed, so that's going to bode very, very well for this area. But I'm very optimistic about this session that we're going to be focusing on those issues that impact people each and every day in and day out, the bread and butter issues, as I call them, and it's going to be property tax relief, funding for education, making sure we have affordable and accessible health care, and some of those things we need to protect our communities with flood mitigation. So looking forward to a good discussion this morning.
Thank you. Representative Ben Leon.
Thank you, Les, and I'd like to thank the League for hosting us today. I'd like to thank Globe University as well for hosting us today, and of course, you all for coming out on this blustery morning. And I would like to start by, again, thanking you all for allowing me the opportunity to serve Moorhead and Old Port Township. It's a tremendous honor to represent my community and to be a part of the institution that is the Minnesota State House of Representatives. It's been quite an experience so far this week. And as Representative Marquardt and Senator Eakin has said, I think the biggest issue is going to be the state budget, getting that under control for this biennium and getting it under control for future bienniums, making sure we have those structural solutions to the budget so we're not passing it on. And I really like what the House has done as far as the first couple of bills we've presented relating to property tax relief, paying back the schools, some economic development, getting the healthcare program set up, the healthcare exchange set up. So I really like seeing what we've done right out the gate, and I really hope we can continue that and address some of these real concerns that not only what we campaigned on, but what will get our state moving forward and making sure we can take care of these very important economic issues.
Thank you. We have several questions turned in, and some of them are similar. So what I'm going to do is sort of summarize and not exactly read what you're talking about. There were 3 or 4 questions that are related to the homeless. And I'll just read one of them for you, or maybe 2 of them, and you can answer however you wish. There are youth who are homeless and not served by emergency shelters. What can be done? Can we balance the budget without defunding critical life-saving programs for the poor and the homeless? So it's a similar... And here's another one on homeless services and supporting housing development for those that have little or no money. So I think we'll start with Representative Marquardt.
Well, thank you. And that's a very important question. This year I'm chairing the Education Finance Committee. And one of the areas we're really focusing on is early childhood education, because we know that that is really a key to closing the achievement gap and making sure that students not only do better at school, but just as far as society, less crime and all of those things. At a meeting we held earlier in Moorhead about a month and a half ago, I learned that about 50% of all the homeless are children. And when you have children that are homeless, it impacts severely their educational progress. And to me, if we want a world-class economy in Minnesota, we need a world-class education system. And that means every single student has to be college and career ready. And right now, we have students of color and students of economic disadvantage that are scoring at only 1/2 the graduation rates and only 1/2 the math proficiency rates as other students. That is unacceptable, and it will not get us to a world-class economy. In fact, I see the achievement gap as our #1 economic threat into the future for economic vitality and strength. It is a huge, huge factor that will impact our quality of life and the economy. So we are working in education, because when we look at the well-being of the child, it's not just in education. It's in the child care funding in the Health and Human Service Department. And what we are focusing on is bringing all of those together and dealing with, in fact, I was just meeting with some folks from the Education Department, and we are looking at, and homelessness came up as a topic, how we need to address all of those things, child care, homelessness, quality education, before they ever even hit kindergarten. So it's a huge issue with a lot of ramifications to our quality of life and economic vitality.
Thank you. Representative Ben Lien.
I was, during the campaign, I was at an event at the Fargo Dome, and it was kind of a homelessness awareness event. Folks could come in and get some services, haircuts, things like that. But it was also a way for the community to be aware of the real need for homelessness, and for folks to know of other resources they could take advantage of. And when I walked away from it, I thought, you know, this is a serious need. This addresses so many other needs, such as unemployment and health care, and as Paul said, education. And I decided that this was something that I really did want to take on, and I really did want to work on through legislation and areas. So that is something I am committed to really taking on and finding solutions for, because there is a real need in our community. I think the vacancy rate is somewhere around 2-3%. So that's a lot of folks in our community that don't have a stable shelter. And days like today, I really can't even imagine what that would be like. As far as balancing the budget on programs that help folks who are impoverished and homeless, I really do think that over the last 10 years or so, the folks who have less they've shouldered enough of that burden, where we need to be looking at other ways we can balance the budget and other solutions that's not going to take away from folks who not only have already paid, in my mind, but really who shouldn't be asked to pay much more. I realize we all have to be a part of the solution, but when you don't have a lot to begin with, it's hard to give any more than what you already have.
Senator Kent Egan, I'll give you a minute to get the mic back over there.
And Representative Marquardt is absolutely right. We need to take a holistic approach here when we're considering children in particular, and making sure that they start off on the right path. It's in the best interest of our whole society, and I think many people lose sight of that. It's not just the individuals who are being cut that are going to pay the price here for our budget deficit. It's our whole society, because these children and these individuals, not just the children, but the adults as well, are not going to be fully contributing as much as they could to our society. So it's in society's best interest to make sure that we provide the funding necessary to ensure that these individuals and these children are provided with the opportunities to develop to their fullest potential and to become full contributing members of our communities. one of the problems that we have with those and the poor communities, these poor individuals, is that they are not organized, and they do not have a platoon of lobbyists down in the legislature advocating on their behalf. So that means it's even more important for us to speak up on their behalf in this legislative process to make sure that their voice is being heard and that their concerns are being addressed. And so we do have a real problem in this area in that regard, and I like to cite what they do in California to gauge their prison needs in the future. Is they look at the reading levels of children in elementary. I'm not sure what grade, but there's one in third grade, to see how far along they are, and if they're not very far along, they anticipate greater need for prison needs. So again, that illustrates the cost to our society later on if we don't provide the assistance necessary to get these children started on the right footing. And I was at the same event that Representative Lean was at too, at the Fargo Dome, and I think it's important that we focus a lot of attention on that, on those issues, not just for those individuals, but for our whole society generally.
Thank you very much. I'm going to change the topic slightly, and I'm going to read this question statement as it was submitted to me. With the current budget problems in Minnesota, business property taxes have been targeted. This can result in business closing, reduced sales tax receipts, and reduced withholding taxes collected. We look at this session to rethink and reform the valuation rules for business commercial property. We also ask for strict rules for cities to follow in regarding increasing business property values. So it's a property value and a property tax question. And is it Representative Ben Lean first this time? Go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you.
That is something that I do want to focus on. After election night, I decided, okay, what are the areas that I personally really want to focus on with my first term, and programs for the border cities, border city enterprise zones, and bonding money to finish up our flood projects were the two areas that I decided I need to go down to St. Paul and really take care of business. Those are going to be my priorities. So making sure that our local businesses on this side of the river are successful is a very, very huge concern of mine. I look at what's going on in North Dakota. The idea that they had earlier this year of completely eliminating property taxes is pretty alarming to me, and that's not just for businesses, but also for residents. So we need to make sure that there is real property tax relief, not just for homeowners, but also for businesses, and making sure that we have a strong local business climate. That's something I very much am going to focus on and have started to have conversations with legislators about.
Thank you very much. Senator Eakin.
And I agree with Representative Lean that, is it on? Is it on there? Yeah, okay. This is an important issue that we need to focus on. It's been hitting our area the hardest, not just with homeowners, but businesses as well. And so we need to get a handle on these ever-increasing property taxes. It's been the result of shifting that burden that I talked about in the very beginning, shifting the burden from the state level to the local level, so forcing them to raise property taxes, which, again, we don't have the base that they do in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities, which is why it hits us so much harder. Property taxes are becoming the #1 burden for our businesses up here, and the greatest threat, I think, to our economic prosperity, especially considering what's happening, as Representative Lean had said, what's been happening in North Dakota. We can anticipate that the competitive nature between North Dakota and Minnesota is going to intensify as more and more of that oil money is being used for the purposes of lowering their taxes. So again, we need to get a handle on that. That does require that we're going to have to generate some revenue at the state level. I mean, quite frankly, if you don't do it at the state level, you're going to see property taxes continue to go up at the local level. So And I've got ideas as to how to accomplish that. I think that it will be done this time around, and I think that the business community and the greater Minnesota communities in particular are going to be very much interested in generating some revenue at the state level so that we can take the burden off of these property taxes.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
Well, thank you. And Kent and Ben really hit the nail on the head. It is really going to impact the border areas here in Minnesota when we talk about increasing property taxes. Every couple years, every couple years, the Moorhead City officials always put out a wonderful document that looks at comparisons on equal values of home and businesses between Fargo and Moorhead. And as we all know, income taxes are higher here in Minnesota, but the advantage we've had is lower property taxes. So when you really look at things, it actually comes out a little bit better on the Minnesota side. But when you've got the surplus they have in North Dakota right now, you have the governor who said he's going to put $700 million into property tax relief. Put that in comparison to Minnesota, times about seven, that'd be like $5 billion of property tax relief in Minnesota. That becomes a huge, huge issue for residents and businesses here on the border, especially, but here in rural Minnesota. And so we need to, and Representative Lean's already been beating that drum down in the state legislature in talking about that big, huge inequity that we might have. So we need to really put investment there, and it may cost some money to do that, but I really see that as a huge competitive issue, not only for businesses, but for residences and quality of life. We need to provide property tax relief. Pretty good sum if we can this year.
Thank you very much. Representative Lean. Oh, he started it. Okay, thank you. I'm glad somebody in the audience is keeping track of me. I'd like to remind the audience, if anyone would like to come up and use the mic to make a statement, ask a question, I would appreciate it, and I'm sure that our audience members would appreciate hearing somebody other than me ask the questions. Is there anyone who would like to come up here? Okay. We've got 2 cards submitted related to the health insurance healthcare exchange program. So what I'm going to do is just give you the opportunity to talk about what you see will be done in the healthcare exchange within the state of Minnesota. So I believe we start with Senator Eakin again.
Yeah, and this is one of the first things that's going to be dealt with in the legislature because of the tight timeline that we're operating under. The Affordable Care Act allows states to set up their own health care exchange. If the states don't do it, the federal government does it for them. And we believe that it's best for the state to set up its own system. It gives us greater ownership of that system as well. Not just it doesn't just allow us to set up a system that's going to fit Minnesota better, but it gives us more control over that system into the future as well, because it'll be state decision makers that are running it more so than the federal government. So I think it behooves us to act quickly on this and moving forward. I do serve on the Health and Human Services Committee, so this is the first thing we're going to be dealing with out of the chute. And we're again, it's a tight timeline. By the end of March, we're going to have the plan in place and moving forward. And this does it sets up this exchange where people can go online and access information about healthcare plans, and it really generates more competition in that regard because people can start comparing apples to apples and understand what the options are that are available out there, including public and private options that are available out there. So this is a very important piece of legislation, so input at this stage is critical because, as I say, it's moving along quite quickly. It has to be in place by January of 2014. But there's a number of steps that have to be done before we get there, so that's why the legislation actually has to be passed by the end of March. And it's one of the first pieces of legislation that went in the Senate and also in the House. So again, moving forward quite quickly. And by the way, it's not just it's not really a political thing. We went to this One Minnesota conference where there were 2 people that presented on the healthcare exchange. One was a very conservative Republican, one was a Democrat, And both of them were advocating for the states doing it themselves. The conservative was arguing that we want the states to have more control, not the federal government. So,
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
You know, when you and I go out and buy a new car, we go out and shop around. Even if we go out and buy a new refrigerator, we go out and shop around trying to get the best one that meets our needs. Why in the world would we not want to do the same thing for something much more important, our health? And that's really the concept behind these health exchanges, is that it will allow, especially folks who do not have health insurance right now, to go out and be able to go on to a marketplace where they can look at what is the best fit. They will have several levels that they can purchase. And I have always been a strong believer that the more people we can get health insurance to, the better it is for everyone. For everyone. A few years ago, the Hospital Association said that they had $600 million of uncompensated care. That's when folks come into the emergency rooms or elsewhere and they can't pay for it. That $600 million has to go somewhere. And it goes to higher costs for health care and higher health care premiums. And so not only is it a cost to all of us, but it's a cost to society, because those people who do not have health insurance tend to miss work more, lost work productivity. The children tend to do worse in school, much more cost down the line. So I think, I forget what the number is, literally, I think hundreds of thousands of people will now get health insurance through these healthcare exchanges through a marketplace, which I think is crucial for the quality of life of rural Minnesota, but our entire state.
Thank you. Representative Leon.
Minnesota has been on the forefront of setting up the state-run health exchange, and I'm really glad to see that. For one, we've gotten a head start compared to other states in the country where we're ready to go. Kent had said by the end of March we'll have to have it in place, and we're sitting pretty good as far as being able to hit that goal. We've also been able to take advantage of some federal dollars to help us get this set up. So those are two benefits that, because we took the initiative early on, we were able to take advantage and get this set up for us. Something else I really like that I've been hearing about the health exchange is that it does have bipartisan support in St. Paul. Representative Joe Atkins was the Democrat who sponsored the legislation, and I read a news story, Representative Jim Abler, who's a Republican, had spoken out in support of it. And I think the consensus really breaks down to, okay, if this is something that the Supreme Court has upheld, that it is best run by the state. So I really do think that everybody down in St. Paul is on board as far as getting this set up as quickly as possible and getting it set up so that it's a program that we, Minnesota, can run to best serve us.
Thank you. And following up on that, there was another question that I think will fit into part of your answer. In this legislative session, will there be more room for compromise on major issues with the state of Minnesota? Representative Marquardt, you get to start this.
Well, absolutely. And even though you have a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature, we need to have bipartisan buy-in on all these bills. On the Education Committee, we are spending the first month in that Finance Committee. We're not going to talk about dollars. What we're going to talk about are goals and what are the best ways to get there. And we've already identified 5 major goals in the Education Finance Committee. And now we're going to start looking at what are the best ways to get there, the most cost-efficient ways that will provide us the best benefit and the best value into the long term. And we all agree on that. Democrats and Republicans, we agree on what we need to do in education, for example. We need to close the achievement gap. We have to raise performance standards. You know, we need to make sure we have strong, viable schools in our area. That's what we need to focus on. And once we do that, we talk about results and we talk about outcomes. We all agree on that. And that's where the focus really has to be. Are there going to be disagreements? Absolutely. There should be. This is a democracy. We were just at a meeting the other day. If this was a dictatorship, you wouldn't have to worry. You know, things would get done real quickly. Might not be the best way, but things would get done quickly. There wouldn't be many news stories to write about us going back and forth. Good dialogue, good debate is healthy for democracy. But it is crucial that we have bipartisan approaches as we hit some very, very important legislation this year.
Thank you. Representative Leon.
Well, I agree with Representative Marquardt that good policy comes from good conversation, and that needs to be had by both the Republican folks and the Democrat folks. Now, we haven't had too many debates yet on the floor. I think the Senate may have gotten a little more contentious already, but I've been making every effort I can to reach out to Republican folks and just get to know who my colleagues are. I had lunch the other day with Representative Deb Keel from East Grand Crookston. She represents East Grand Forks also, to try and start some conversation about the border city programs. But I really do think when you take that initiative to meet folks on a personal basis, that transcends to policy too, where you can understand, okay, this is where this individual is coming from on a specific policy support for these personal reasons. So I've certainly been making the efforts I can make to reach out to folks and to really get to know folks on a personal level. And I really think we need to be working on a bipartisan basis. As Representative Marquardt said, we do control both chambers in the legislature and the governor's office, but that by no means gives us any right to go and just run policy down anybody's throat. We need to take a real, conscious, clear, bipartisan approach to these conversations and make sure that everybody is on board, because that is really the best policy that's going to work for our state.
Thank you. Senator Eakin, do you care to comment about the Senate?
Sure. Well, I think things will go more, well, I'm hoping they go more smoothly here in the future, and that the past legislative session was not very good as far as compromise was concerned. There were a lot of folks that seemed to think that compromise was a dirty word, and thought that the compromise was to fail. That, in fact, is not how democracy works. I've been a teacher of government and understand the importance of compromise. We wouldn't even have the United States of America if it wasn't for compromise and developing that Constitution. So compromise is absolutely key and critical, and I've always known that. I've always been willing to compromise, and it does take two to compromise, obviously. Both sides have to be willing to give something. And democracy is a messy process. You're going to see a lot of argument, a lot of contentious debates, and that's the way it should be in a democratic process. People have strong feelings about the districts they represent and about the issues they're advocating for and the people they're advocating for. That's the way it should work, but there should be, in the end, compromise. So, but there is going to be a lot of contentious debate before we get to that point, but it is a process of personal relationships, and even though we're in the majority, it's important to reach out to the minority and to work with minority members. It is a process of personal relationships, and after all, we might be in the minority next time around, so we better not. We better be treating the minority fairly well and including them in this process as well. So.
Thank you, Senator. We do have a follow-up question from someone in the audience of a question that was asked before, so I'm going to yield the mic to Joe.
Good morning. I'm Joe Peterson, the Executive Director of Lakes and Prairies Community Action here in Moorhead and Chair of the Minnesota Community Action Association. Those struggling most with the healthcare exchange when it's fully implemented obviously are going to be the low income and the elderly. And I hope that we remember in terms when we're looking at the exchange that the Navigator program and the Assister program that they're talking about to help those folks. There's one nonprofit in Minnesota that covers all 87 counties and has over 5,000 staff on the ground to help with those people that need that help, and that's Community Action in Minnesota. The Minnesota Community Action Association and Lakes and Prairies stand ready to help in any way we can to move the health exchange forward.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, very much. Would you care to comment on that? Whose turn is it first? I think it's Representative Leon.
I think so.
Are you next first? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate that. I really don't have too much to comment on that other than I appreciate the information, and I certainly will, have a conversation with folks as to how the healthcare exchange will be set up to be able to reach out to people who don't have access to the online system or to other resources that would allow them to opt in on an easier basis. So I appreciate the information.
Thank you. Senator Eakin.
And thank you, Joe. I appreciate your comments as well. And it shows that Minnesota is in a good position right now to take advantage of this for setting up the exchange. I think we're far ahead of other states already. We have an infrastructure in place, as you were referring to, with a navigator, and with other navigators as well. The public sector is going to be involved also in helping people navigate this process. But we are in a better position than most other states to set up a system that's going to really accomplish the goal of making sure that these people, it's over 300,000 people that we're talking about, are going to be able to access affordable care in a way that generates more competition and ensures that we get the best care for the best price. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
Well, yeah, and thank you, Joe, for those comments. And it's important if we're going to have a program that really works, that the outreach is effective and we're getting to each and every person that needs that. And it's nice to know we have an infrastructure in place and the community action agencies around the state. And I've been at a few of your, or at least a couple of your annual meetings, and the work that's being done around the state by our community action partners is tremendous, getting to people who really need that step up. And so thanks for your work.
Okay, we're going to do another follow-up question that was submitted up here, and I am going to get to the other questions. The follow-up question is, business taxes have been addressed. That was an earlier question. But regulatory issues make Minnesota one of the most difficult states in the nation to do business. How can we improve this? Senator Eakin, I believe you're first.
Well, and I agree that we need to address the regulatory issues, and a lot of these regulations are well-intentioned, but oftentimes the way they're implemented is not practical. So we need to ensure that these regulations actually work. I'm often concerned about a one-size-fits-all type regulatory system that's developed down in St. Paul, and again, we are outnumbered as rural legislators and greater Minnesota legislators. So oftentimes those regulations are really written for a metropolitan type environment and don't fit well in our greater Minnesota communities. So we need to make sure that when these regulations are being written and reviewed, that our greater Minnesota concerns and the way things work up here are being addressed. And I actually think that there should be exemptions for some businesses under certain sizes, because a lot of these regulations are written for the larger ones. And again, actually just add a hindrance to business for our smaller businesses without having the benefits. So this is a very important issue. I think it's one that we can get bipartisan support on and working on both sides of the aisle. We should be looking more at it, I think, from a geographic perspective, again, making sure that we write regulations that fit here. And so we have done some work in the past in streamlining the permitting process for businesses, and I have been supportive of that, trying to speed up permitting processes so that we're more competitive with other states. And again, we have that issue of competing with North Dakota as well, so we always have to have that in mind when we're dealing with regulatory issues. But it's definitely a concern of mine, and again, one that we should be working on a bipartisan basis.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
The second day we went into session this year, we had a conference, and one of the speakers there was the executive vice president of the Minneapolis-St. Paul Economic Development. They go out, it's actually a 13-county area where they try to promote and attract businesses. And that question was asked to her, what specific regulation, for example, would you like to see changed? And she said, I can't think exactly of a specific regulation, but it's more of the uncertainty of you get into the process and you think it's a 30-day, and then there's another step and it becomes 60 days. And so I think we need to be a lot clearer on things. Back about 10 years ago, I served on a livestock siting task force that Governor Plenty had called. And the problem with farmers trying to increase livestock was the uncertainty. And there really wasn't a set procedure of, for sure, when you start on process A, that you had, steps A, B, and C to follow, and you were done. So I think the key is to find out where it's very inconsistent right now and how we can clean that up. I know in the last session, in a bipartisan effort, we tried to reduce the amount of times it took to do permits and so forth, try to streamline the process. But it is a huge, huge concern, because not only do you have the property tax concerns, but you do have regulatory concerns that are inconsistent and, quite frankly, not practical at certain times that we need to address.
Thank you. Representative Lean.
I think Senator Eakin and Representative Marquardt are correct that we do need to further look at streamlining permitting processes. I know recently we have been able to speed up certain permitting processes to 150 days, and Governor Dayton has come out and said, okay, well, why can't we do this in 90 days? So that, for example, is something we need to take a look at, and it is the inconsistency, the uncertainty that, you told me one thing, you told me this is going to take 30 days, okay, now you found something else, so it's going to take 60 days. So really making sure that we can cover all bases with legislation that definitely requires thinking outside the box, and I understand certain individual situations always come up, but really making sure that we can cover all the bases with any new regulation. And I certainly would like to have those conversations with folks, particular specific business owners, as to what specific regulations people are having problems with, because I would very much like to be aware of those issues and those situations as we take a look at this issue.
Thank you. I do have another member from the audience that would like to come up and ask a question related to higher education, and Representative Marquardt will be the first to respond to it.
Thank you. My name is Jim Hausman, and I'm retired from Concordia College. And we have two members of higher education committees here. That doesn't mean Paul Marquardt can't speak first on the issue, but I thought it would be important that we address something about higher education. The expenditures on higher education have increased at the same time as a percentage of the state budget. They have gone down significantly. The result of that is, as you well know, rising tuitions. At the same time, that doesn't seem to address all of the issues as I understand it. If I'm a student at the University of Minnesota and I'm working 25 hours a week and I'm in line to probably borrow $25,000 or $30,000 before I graduate, freezing tuitions does not help me a great deal. It simply means that next year I'm still in the same boat, where I am working too much, borrowing too much. And so the answer in part of that is, indeed, yes, we need to moderate tuition increases, but there's need-based student aid that addresses the needs of those who qualify for it, and it's a progressive way of spending the state's money. So I hope as you hear, as there is a loud cry for freezing tuition, that you also realize that we can help students in need by also providing more money. At the University of Minnesota, there was a time when the maximum state grant and Pell Grant was equal to the tuition at the university. That has not kept up. It's now 71% of the tuition at the university. So please keep that in mind as you hear these hues and cries for freezing tuition.
Thank you very much, and I'd just like to add to that, Concordia College, an excellent four-year institution in our beautiful city of Moorhead, along with MSUM, M-State, and Globe University, where we're here. So we're a higher education community. And Representative Marquardt, you get to go first.
Very good. And my first term, I did serve on the higher ed committee, so I've got a little background in that area, but I'm going to let Ben and Kent talk more to the higher ed. But on Thursday, it was a wonderful meeting in education policy. We had the Chancellor of the Minskew System, Stephen Rosenstone, there, Commissioner of Education, Brenda Casalius, and Director of the Office of Higher Education, Larry Poggemiller, talking about a lot of these things. And I want to talk about one way in which we can cut college classes or college costs for students just by what we do in high school. What we know is that almost 40% of the graduates from Minnesota that go on to a MnSCU university have to end up taking some remedial classes. 40%. Those are dollars that parents are paying, students are paying that don't go for one new credit. And so one of the things we need to do, and it was the talk of that conversation, is how do we mesh better standards in high school that matches up with what our colleges here in Minnesota and around the nation are expecting. And so we need to step it up in our high school. That is going to be really important. And there's a number of wonderful programs I'm not going to go into right now where they're trying to do that link. But for the first time ever in the state, you've got people from MnSCU, the Department of Education, Office of Higher Education, working together, actually, and that's what they mentioned, talking about how we can do things together, a lot more college classes in the high school and so forth. So there's a lot we can do just on the high school level to make sure people are prepared for college. And that'll be the segue now to the higher education folks here.
Thank you, Representative Liam.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Hausman. I do agree that the dollars the state appropriates do need to go toward controlling tuition costs for students. As it stands now, students pay their tuition at a rate of 2 to 3, whereas I believe about 1997, 1998, it was 1 to 3, so that's completely flipped. Now, based on the conversations I've had and the published accounts I've seen with Chair Representative Gene Pulowski of the Higher Ed Committee, we're going to start this session by really taking a look at the budgets of MnSCU and the U of M. I know there have been some articles recently published in, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal, about the U of M budget and the bloat at the top with some of the administration. And so that is something he is very focused on, and that's been the talk that I've been hearing lately as far as higher education, is that we're going to be taking a look at the administrative dollars first and the dollars that some of these institutions use for the administration first. Along with that, though, every conversation I've had also includes the idea that people say, yes, we need to be putting the money towards student tuition relief, student debt relief. I believe right now or very quickly, student debt relief will surpass student debt will surpass credit card debt as the biggest source of personal debt. So that to me is very alarming. Something else too I think we need to address and take a look at when we talk about higher education is folks graduating with debt and not having a job, not having any place to go with their degree. And based on conversations I've had with some folks in the MnSCU system, people are really taking a look and really starting to think about ways we can turn the curricula and the academic programs toward job readiness and job preparedness, whether that be changing courses, changing programs, but also really teaming up with employers and local companies to make sure that folks are getting the training they need for the work world while they're in school. So I do agree with you that we do need to address student tuition costs with state dollars, and that we need to be opening up the higher education curricula to get folks in the workforce.
Thank you. Senator Eakin.
Thank you. And I have a daughter who's currently attending Concordia College, and so I know firsthand the impact that tuition is having on family budgets, and the importance of the grant program, and making sure that that's a strong program as well for students, as well as addressing the tuition issue also, because tuition has gone through the roof as a result of cuts to higher education in the last 10 years. It used to be a time when 2/3 of the cost of higher education was borne by the state, and 1/3 by the students and their families, and that's flipped now in the last decade or so. Now the students are picking up 2/3 of the cost, and the state's only picking up a third. As a matter of fact, I thought at our public institutions, when do you stop calling it public? At one point, if it's being more privately financed through the students themselves, it's still publicly subsidized, but it's really becoming a burden for our students. And I'm concerned about the sticker shock of that high tuition, and that is discouraging a lot of good quality young people from going into college and developing to their fullest potential. It's a real loss to our society because they're not going to have those talents and those skills developed to contribute more back to our society. So we really need to address this, and I agree that it needs to be from both sides. I think we need a strong grant program as well as having the funding necessary to ensure that tuition doesn't go too high. Because even with a grant program, there's still that sticker shock that students experience when they see it, and that can discourage a lot of good people from going on and developing to their fullest potential. And higher education, I really believe, needs to be one of our highest priorities, education generally, because it really should be seen as one seamless system. Early childhood through K-12 through college, and I'm glad that Representative Marquardt addressed the issue of how it ties in with the K-12 system, and we need to be taking a holistic approach in that regard as well. But again, it needs to be a high priority. Education generally is a real economic engine for our state. It's the reason that I think we've outranked other states as far as the number of businesses that we develop. That we have more Fortune 500 companies that have started and stayed here than any others per capita than any other state in the country, and I believe that higher education is one of the main reasons for that. And it's always been a high priority. And in my life, I went into education. I've been teaching social studies and have taught as an adjunct instructor here at MSUM and at M-State over in Detroit Lakes, and also a graduate of Concordia myself. So thank you.
Thank you. This next question has to do with organization of the legislature down there, and I'm going to read it for you because I don't want to misask the question. How does Minnesota, in particular rural Minnesota, benefit from 8 committee chairs from outstate Minnesota and 23 committee chairs from the metro area? And included in this question was, whose idea was it to combine the environmental and ag committees together and then make someone from the metro area the chair? Okay? Now you all understand why I read that right rather than say something else. And Representative Leon, I believe you are the man that gets first crack at this. Thank you.
An overwhelming majority of the state dollars, the state budget that is appropriated for programs, those dollars are going to come from committees that are chaired by Greater Minnesota legislators. So we do have that going for us, and this was actually the one of the really only debates I've seen thus far on the floor was the debate about ag finance being its own committee, and I really thought it was an issue that needed to be discussed in the Rules Committee, which is who sets up all the committees. So I voted more on a procedural basis that this was the proper procedure for the House. Let those folks who have been designated the task of deciding the committees to take care of that.
Thank you. Senator Eakin, would you like me to read it again?
No, that's
No,
fine.
thank you.
I think it maybe does, as far as the committee assignments, I think that was a reference to what was happening more so over on the House side. In the Senate side, we do have significant representation from the rural areas in leadership positions, including the majority leader himself, Tom Bach, who comes from the Iron Range area of Minnesota, the most powerful member of the Minnesota State Senate. And then we also have Rod Skoy, who was my senator until redistricting, but he represents the area right next to me up here, and he is chair of the tax committee. That's an elected position in the Senate because it's such an important position. There's only 2 committees for which they have the whole caucus elect who the chair will be. That's one of them. And Senator Skoye is going to be a very strong advocate for greater Minnesota interests in that important issue area of tax reform. And that's going to be a big issue this year, is tax reform. So we do have good representation, and actually in the Senate again on the issue of the Ag and the Environment Committee being under the same heading, and it is in the Senate as well. But we have Senator David Tomasoni, who is also a rural legislator who's in control of that committee. So again, in the Senate, I think we have very good rural representation. I think it's important to note, too, that there is a separate Ag Policy Committee that's separate from the Finance Division. So Ag policy issues will be looked at separately from the environment issues. And that's obviously, then that also is chaired by a rural member from agricultural communities. So I think it's important to look at, and also Representative Lean, I think, made an important point that in the House too, and Representative Markwick can speak more to this, but he had already said that the majority of the funding is going through committees that are controlled by rural chairs, including our own Representative Paul Marquardt, who has jurisdiction over I think it's more than 40% of the state budget or so with K-12. So,
thank you. With an intro like that, Representative Marquardt.
Well, that really is a great question, and I'm real pleased to address that, because a huge concern for us in rural Minnesota is to make sure that we have the clout in St. Paul. I mean, that is crucial. Every time we have a new redistricting, we lose seats and we lose a little bit of number power down in the state legislature. So it's really, really important that rural Minnesota stays on the forefront. With that, let's really look at the facts. And the number of committees, first of all, doesn't mean anything. And I would ask everyone at the end to look at the results. Look at what the outcomes and results of the session are. But in the House, in the Senate, there has never, in the 14 years or 12, 13 years I've been in the state legislature, has rural Minnesota ever had a stronger influence in committee structure, ever. 83% of the budget in Minnesota is controlled on a committee by a chairman from rural Minnesota. Education Finance, 41% of the budget. Health and Human Services, Thomas Huntley, rural Minnesota, 31% of the budget. Higher Education, 8% of the budget, Gene Pulowski, rural Minnesota. State Government, another 3 to 4% of the budget, Mary Murphy. 84% of the budget under the control of rural chairman. That is as strong as I have ever seen it. But again, let's look at the results in the end. And what I find kind of interesting, if I might, is those who have brought this issue forward. And remember, and you know, the Agriculture Environment Committee will certainly watch that. But there hasn't even been a committee hearing yet, not one. And the folks back in November elected us to work together. And before one committee has ever been heard, or one bill in any committee, and hearing about this, it's much to do about nothing. Let's look at the results. But many of those same folks who are the most indignant right now about the structure were the ones that cut the homestead credit, voted for cutting the homestead credit that increased property taxes $52 million on ag land, directly a result of that. Raised taxes over $100 million on businesses. And they're the same ones who voted for a plan last year that would have taken away the state business-wide property tax, $800 million a year. They didn't pay for it. That's why, would have created a $1.6 billion hole in the future. But I stood up on the floor last year and said, you're talking about the economy, and yet out of this $800 million bill that you're going to see all these property tax cuts to businesses, not one dime of property tax cut to farmers. There wasn't one dime in there for agriculture. So let's just calm down a little bit, let the session take place. But, and another reason this has kind of made the news is because there's nothing else going on right now. But again, let's just sit back, wait. I will say that right now, from what I see, that rural Minnesota has never had a stronger influence on bills. But wait for the results, because that's what we have to be measured on.
Thank you. We've been at this for an hour. Do either of the three of you have to be somewhere soon? can we continue? I got about 4 more questions here. Is that all right? And then we want to make sure to give you an opportunity at the end for a statement. Okay. With that, Senator Eakin, I believe you get this. What are your thoughts on, it says, what are your thoughts on marriage for this session? I have a feeling what are your thoughts on the definition of marriage for this session?
I'm
So,
hopefully still will be
Senator
married
Eakin-
after the session.
Senator Eakin, it's not a joke, and I don't mean to make light of it, but the definition of marriage, the amendment that did not pass in the general election. Your comments and thoughts, please.
Sure. Well, I think that the results of the last election were, I think some people misread what the results were. I think one of the reasons the amendment failed, one of the biggest reasons was simply because people felt we should be focusing our efforts on the bread and butter issues that affect us on a daily basis, issues pertaining to property taxes and issues pertaining to education and long-term care, health care, roads and bridges, those types of issues. So I don't think the message was that we should go off in the complete opposite direction on the same issue. I think it's to focus on those bread and butter issues. I think there was a certain level of frustration among the population that the structural deficit problem was not being fixed and that we were getting sidetracked on some of these social issues that are very divisive in our society and not dealing with some of those bread and butter issues. So my view is that we should focus on those issues, make sure that we fix the structural deficit problem, get property taxes under control, get tuition under control, make sure that we have good roads and bridges and a good competitive business climate in our state, that we have good infrastructure, and that we have the flood dollars that we need to complete our flood projects here. So those are the issues that I think people want to focus on.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt.
And I would agree with a lot of what Senator Eakin just said. I do think the no vote on that was for many reasons, and one was just the frustration that the legislature was not focusing on the issues that really were at hand, because all of the amendments that were on the ballot did not create one new job, didn't lower one person's property taxes, didn't help one person get to college, didn't help anyone with their health care. And I think people said, you know what, you're not focusing on those issues that I sit around and talk about at the kitchen table each and every night. And so I think, as Senator Eakin just said, we need this session to really concentrate on those issues that impact people day in and day out. And I'm hoping that focus stays on education, on how we can create jobs, how we can get, make college more accessible, lower property taxes. Those are really the issues we have to focus on this session.
Thank you, Representative Leon.
Well, we the DFL, of course, as I said earlier, we do have control of both chambers and the governor's office, and we, for the most part, statewide, we ran a campaign on property taxes, we ran a campaign on economic development, we ran a campaign on education, we ran a campaign on jobs. And the people of Minnesota, they spoke through the ballot box and gave us the authority and the power to take control of the state government. And along with power comes responsibility to govern well. And based on what I've seen come out of the legislature thus far, as some of the first bill introductions, I believe we are handling that responsibility quite well, focusing on economic development, focusing on property taxes, focusing on K-12 education, and I think that's what we really need to continue to focus on. As I said, we ran a campaign about the bread and butter issues, and thus far that's what I've seen come out of the legislature, our bread and butter issues, to get our state working again and to get our state's finances under control.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt gets to start the next question. How is the Minnesota State Legislature going to participate in the current debate on policies to improve safety measures for gun use and gun ownership? Representative Marquardt.
We need to do whatever we can to keep our schools safe and to make sure that what happened in Connecticut never happens again. Like most issues that are awful like this one, we need to step back and really take a deep breath and look at, what is a holistic approach to this? And I think we have to look at, I think everything has to be fairly on the table. We have to look at mental health issues. We have to look at accessibility to guns and all of those things. I mean, they all have to be on the table. I do think that I would not, the federal government is looking at some things. I think we need to see what shakes out there. I really think when you're looking at school safety, and I've been contacted by some superintendents, for example, that may want to look at changing the structure of their school a little bit, like entranceways or where windows are situated and so forth. Maybe there's some way we can provide dollars there. But I think what you've seen too much right now is just people jumping to some easy solution, which isn't there. It's very complex. But at the same token, nothing should be taken off the table. So for someone to say you can't talk about mental health, or someone to say you can't talk about guns in this situation, that all has to be part of the mix. We have to take a comprehensive look at things, but let's not do it in a knee-jerk reaction type of things. Let's look at it holistically and with some calm and patience.
Thank you. Representative Leon.
Well, this to me is it's not a black and white issue. This is a very gray issue, and I do support the right of folks to keep arms, folks who are law-abiding citizens to keep arms to protect themselves, to protect their families, for recreational purposes. I fully support that. With that being said, I think the real conversation needs to be about keeping arms from folks who otherwise maybe wouldn't use them for the right purposes. I think that includes folks with a violent criminal history. Mental illness may have to be a part of this conversation. So I think this is a conversation that needs to be had very delicately. It needs to be had with complete clarity to the facts. And we really can't rush to conclusions about this. It was a tragedy what happened last month, and it's very unfortunate that tragic events have to spur these types of conversations, but that is the situation we're dealing with, and we need to proceed with as absolute caution as possible to be sure that folks' rights aren't taken away while we are also able to protect our communities.
Thank you. Senator Egan.
Well, and I agree again with both Representative Lean and Representative Marquardt on this. It's not a simple issue to deal with. There's a lot of complexities involved here, and you do have to look at it from a variety of perspectives, and not just the gun issue, but also the mental health issue. I think that in the recent debate, the gun debate has overshadowed sometimes the mental health issue, which I think should be on an equal plane here, because that is just as much a part of this discussion as the accessibility of guns to people who have these issues, and just trying to deal with it from the gun perspective. There are a lot of guns that are already out there, so even if there were gun restrictions put in place, the guns, there's still a lot out there that they would have access to, so that would not provide an immediate solution to this problem. You really do have to hit it from the mental health perspective as well. But I agree, too, that we can't be making knee-jerk reactions to tragic situations like this. The impulse is great to do something and do something now, and oftentimes things are done that without a great deal of thought, that in some cases aren't very effective and may in some cases be counterproductive and actually have the opposite effect. So, there was the first proposal. It was just days after the tragic event occurred. There was a bill that was put in that would allow for the people in the schools, the teachers and administrators, to carry guns. That was one of the first proposals that was made out there. I think, again, before we start jumping into legislation and acting so quickly, we need to step back, as Representative Marquardt said, take a deep breath, and I think first of all, deal with the tragedy and the mourning process, but then move forward in a very thoughtful way, how to best and most effectively deal with this situation. Not just do things to make us feel good, but do things that actually accomplish the goal of making our schools safer.
Thank you. I'm going to do two more questions, and then I'm going to summarize a little bit what's left over. Here's a question statement. We are in a land of lakes. Our lakes are threatened by invasive species, fertilizer runoff, other issues that are polluting our water. What can be done about it? And I would like to add to that our area here in Moorhead is looking at the aquifer that provides the water to the city of Moorhead. What can be done to protect our valuable water resources? And Representative Lean, I believe you're up on this one.
I've received a couple emails from folks with ideas on how to protect from invasive species in our water systems, and I really think we need to team up with DNR, and we need to team up with local authorities as far as implementing systems to be able to track boats and those types of vehicles that have been in certain water systems, and to make sure they've gone through the proper procedures to clean the systems and clean any of those invasive species out. And with regards to pollution control in our water systems, that is a very tough issue. It's very hard to control that issue. You'd almost have to take a look at the types of substances that folks are using for fertilizer and such in their fields. So I think that certainly have to be a conversation we need to have on a wide scale with folks on some of the environmental and natural resource committees to make sure that we can come up with solutions that will protect our water systems, not just from those invasive species, but to keep them clean as well.
Thank you. Senator Eakin.
There have been steps taken recently to address that issue, setting up a research center at the University of Minnesota to study these issues. And I know they're dealing with things like the Asian carp and the zebra mussels and some of the more high-profile aquatic invasives. Unfortunately, I don't think it goes far enough because it is just dealing with the more visible, more high-profile cases that have already made big news. We don't focus enough attention often on some of the invasives that are just getting started. And it's most effective to deal with those invasives when they're first getting started, not after they become a widespread problem and get all the news coverage. We need to deal with them early and try to nip it in the bud. And that includes prevention and trying to make sure, trying to determine what's going to be the next zebra mussel, what's going to be the next Eurasian milfoil or whatever that's coming down the road, and try to make sure we keep it out of the state so that we don't have to expend so many more resources after it arrives. It's a lot more expensive to deal with it after it's arrived and trying to contain it. And I do believe that we need to access those funds from the legacy funds for these purposes. There's been great resistance, especially that money was set aside for several different purposes, one of which was clean water, one of which was for habitat, for natural habitat. The clean water is a third of that fund, and the natural habitat is a third of that fund. And we're talking about significant resources that are raised by that 3/8 of a cent sales tax that was implemented through constitutional amendment. For instance, with the Habitat Fund, you have a council that was set up, a Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council that is comprised of individuals who are appointed by the governor and the legislature who they don't make the final decision on how that money is going to be spent, but they make recommendations to us. And unfortunately, many of them see that money as being for the acquisition of more land. Not in addressing, taking care of the land that we already have or making sure that our waters are being protected, but in acquiring more land. So their recommendations have all been oriented to that purpose, and they've been very resistant to using those funds. I don't agree with them, and we in the end as legislators have the final decision. They make the recommendations, but we can change them, and I think we should, to make sure that those funds are available. Nothing is more precious than our water resources here in Minnesota. We are the land of 10,000 lakes, and I think in the future clean water is going to be as valuable as oil is today. So we want to protect that resource. We are sitting on a gold mine here, we in Minnesota. We want to protect that resource. And one thing about Minnesota that makes us unique, we're quite fortunate because we are at the headwaters of a lot of these water systems, which means that we can really control our own destiny here. We don't have to worry about other states sending pollution down our way. We're at the headwaters of the Mississippi and so on. So we're in control of our destiny, and we do have the ability to protect this water supply.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
Well, not a lot more to add on this. I mean, I think it's two questions. One is the safety and protection of our waters and aquifers and so forth. And I guess I'm not aware or would know of any new legislation there. I think we have laws to protect that. Maybe it's a matter of enforcement, but it's a key, and we have to stay on top of that. The second area, of course, is aquatic invasive species, as both Ben and Kent have alluded to. Huge economical issue in the Detroit Lakes area, of course, Otter Tail and all of these areas, but Minnesota overall. And as Senator Eakin has mentioned, it's not just education and enforcement to try to combat zebra mussels, but also, I think, ultimately, the final analysis is going to be research that will finally deal with that on what might be a native predator or whatever you might need for zebra mussels. That's going to be a key.
Thank you. The last question I have here is, do you feel there is credible data to support the notion that slightly higher income taxes on persons in upper income brackets harms job growth and investment? Would you like me to do that one again, Senator Eakin? Are you okay with it?
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
And I think, again, when you're looking at taxes, you have to look at the level of taxation. Right now, tax levels have gone down, in recent years, in the recent decades, for the highest income levels, whereas taxes have actually, been going up for those in the lower and middle. And I think there's a correlation there and a reason for that. And I do think that it's out of balance now. I think that I guess I believe more in a flatter tax. Right now it's regressive. As your income levels go down, your tax rates go up. That's the way it works in Minnesota. You wouldn't think so in Minnesota. We're always been considered a very progressive state, but it's that way, I think, in all the states. The tax system is regressive. We may be less regressive than some states, but we are still regressive. And I think that I don't think that that's right. I don't think that just because you have a lower income level, you should be paying a higher percent of your income in taxes. As a matter of fact, I think you should be given more opportunity to be able to set aside and get ahead, and I think that benefits our whole society. And so as far as raising taxes on the highest income levels at this point, I don't think that it would have a negative impact when you look at the whole picture on our business climate, because I think what's having a greater impact right now would be raising property taxes that hit the lower income people hardest and the middle income people, and hit businesses and people in greater Minnesota the hardest. That's what's been having the greatest detrimental impact on our business climate and on our economy here in greater Minnesota. And I think to address that, you'd actually have to raise taxes on the highest income levels more in order to take some of the burden and some of the pressures off of the local property taxes. So I think that it actually works in our favor to pursue that type of path here. I think that's what we should be doing in the legislature, and again, advocating for our area of the state, because our area would benefit the most. We are hurt the most by the cuts that have been coming from the state level, because we do get more revenue from the state than we put in. And it was designed that way to ensure that even out here in greater Minnesota, even though we don't have the population base and we don't have the business tax base that they do in the metropolitan area of the cities, we still are able to provide good quality services at an affordable price. I think that would necessitate that we start to generate some revenue at the state level, and that being through a tax that would apply on the highest income levels who currently pay among the lowest rates.
Thank you. Representative Marquardt.
I've served on the tax committee for at least 10 years now, and we've looked at that real closely. And I think the evidence is very inconclusive. It really doesn't have a big impact. I mean, think back when Bill Clinton was president, taxes were higher, and we had great economy. And then when taxes are cut, we go into big recessions. In the state of Minnesota, on the income tax, I don't know the last time it was raised. I know it was lowered both in '99 and 2000. and we've had ups and downs. But that's not the question. That's not the question. The question is really, what do you need to do to get the economy going? And Minnesota, despite being a very cold weather state, has always ranked high in economic development. And that has, and you talk to anyone, Democrats, Republicans alike, economists, anyone, it's because of the investments we've made in education and infrastructure. That's the key. So how do you do the balance? And again, that's why we have to take a balanced approach. When people come in and say, you know, we're just going to only get there by raising lots of taxes, and then some people say we're only going to get there by cutting taxes, that's missing the point. There has to be a balance if we're going to do this. And also, if we're going to solve a budget right and not use one-time fixes and gimmicks. And as Senator Eakin just mentioned, we have not touched new revenues. We have not in the state of Minnesota, but we all know taxes are going up if you're a property taxpayer. It's doubled in the last 10 years. And last year, property taxes went up 8 times faster in rural Minnesota than the rest of the state. So anytime you make these decisions not to raise any revenue, it falls on rural Minnesota. We have a higher percent of senior citizens on fixed incomes. They have seen their property taxes double in the last 10 years. Senior citizens on fixed incomes, we're doubling property taxes on to protect some people to not raise their income a dime. That's not right. Now, I don't know what the exact answer is, but let's put everything on the table. Cuts, efficiency, revenue increases. If in fact we're going to invest in those things that have really made the difference. We talk only about taxes. The real difference in Minnesota has been education and infrastructure and a high investment and priority on that.
Thank you. Representative Lean.
Can you repeat the question, Les? I just want to get the exact terminology of what
Absolutely,
what was asked.
not a problem. Do you feel there is credible data to support the notion that slightly higher income taxes on persons in upper income brackets harms job growth and investment?
No, I don't. I think you'd have to track with tax cuts that are given to higher income earners, what exactly are they doing with that money? Are they investing it in job growth? Are they investing it in supplies and equipment for the business, or are they investing it in personal investments? So I think you really would have to delve much deeper into the actual numbers and the actual money and what's being done with those tax cuts. Now, I think this is a question that you can run in about 1,000 different directions. First of all, I think we can take a look at 2 different facts to say, okay, higher income earners do pay a larger percentage of income taxes into state revenue, but at the same time, lower income earners pay a larger percentage of their expendable income in taxes. And we have to look at sales tax, we have to look at property tax, we have to look at income tax. So to me, the question is, what do you get for those taxes? And that's something that Minnesota has long been very productive in. We have very strong infrastructure, transportation basis. We have very strong education, K-12 higher ed, and those are 2 traditions that are very proud of this, that this state can be very proud of. I think when it comes due to job growth as well, we have to take a look at a couple other areas, such as the regulations and the permitting process, as we've already discussed here, and that's something we have to take a look at. And I think not just tax cuts, but certain programs, certain tax deductions, and certain tax credits. I think that maybe more than just straight tax cuts can give folks a better climate to operate in, and that'll also help folks to decide what they can and can't do with their business at certain times. If a tax cut or a deduction expires, they may be more likely to hire on new staff, or they may be more likely to purchase equipment. So I really don't think tax cuts alone will help job growth. I think you have to look at a large, really a very large area when it comes to job growth and job creation.
Thank you very much. I have one additional that is more of a statement. So I'm going to call it as such and make sure that you know about it, and we're not going to go into an answer on it. It's related to Oakport and flood protection up there. It's approximately 3/4 done. They have some roads that still go underwater and so forth. And the final statement in here is, please find funds to help us finish it. Okay, so that's a statement from one of our members today, and I would like you to keep that in mind. Now, we have no other questions here. We have nobody that's come up that wanted to speak, so we're going to do brief closing statements from the three legislators that are here. And you know, I've forgotten again who goes first. I think Representative Marquardt is up. So closing statement, please.
Well, thank you very much for attending again, for the excellent questions and discussion. And, you know, we have some very difficult decisions to make this session. And the first is going to be the budget. We have to make sure we have a balanced budget. But it's not just a budget in numbers. I don't want to do just a budget. We need to make sure that this budget invests in those things that are going to make this a better state into the future. A state that's going to increase our economic development, increase jobs, allow more students to go to college in an affordable fashion, allow people living in their homes to stay in their homes, to keep property taxes in check. How can we make sure that we have a strong education system that prepares students for college and career? How can we make sure we have health care that's accessible and affordable? That's the key. Because when we talk about a budget, we're looking at numbers. But when I think about a budget, I'm thinking about people and how that budget impacts folks. And what we do has a huge bearing on rural Minnesota. And so my final, I guess, ask for those here today, those who may be watching this into the future, is we want your input. We want your help. We want to know how things are impacting you each and every day, because that's the type of issue we really want to focus on. So together, we can move the state forward. This is really a crucial year and a crucial budget year for everyone. We've got a lot of, but we all agree on what we need to do, Democrats, Republicans alike. So let's come together, let's everyone provide input, let's do this together. And I think we're gonna do well and improve the future for the state of Minnesota.
Thank you, Representative Leon.
Well, again, want to thank the League and Globe University for hosting us and allowing us this opportunity. Very much appreciated. I'd like to thank Les again for moderating. It's really nice when we, as legislators, have an opportunity to participate in events like this, to understand what people are thinking about, to understand what people are concerned about. And my first mission when I got down there was to set up a system to be able to stay in touch with folks. And I encourage anybody who would like to join an email list I'm starting. It's rep.ben.lean@house.mn. Please send me an email if you'd like to be a part of regular legislative updates. But we certainly do have our work cut out for us this session, and I'm very encouraged at the starting blocks to know that I feel we have our right priorities in order, that we want to get Minnesotans working again, we want to get property taxes under control, we want to pay back the schools, and we want to make sure that students can afford college. So I think we have our priorities in order. I really think, I know it's going to take a bipartisan effort to really have the right conversations and to come up with the right policy prescriptions. And I'm very much looking forward to being a part of this process and taking care of this business.
Thank you, Senator Eakin.
I guess this kind of takes off of the last question we had too, dealing with the tax issue, and I think it's important to note that, you know, the state is more than just a regulator of businesses and of society. It's also a partner in ensuring that we have the capacity for prosperity and economic success, and we need to keep that in mind. It's not the state that spends the least that's the most successful and prosperous. If that was the case, Mississippi would be the most prosperous state in the United States. And it's actually just the opposite. Mississippi ranks last in terms of business climate. It ranks last in terms of infrastructure, educational quality, literacy rates. They're last. They're last in life expectancy. I don't consider Mississippi to be a good model for our state to follow. So we need to understand that we need to have investment in our infrastructure. Again, it's not the state that spends the least, it's the one that invests the most wisely. And we have done a pretty good job in Minnesota. We can always do better, but we've done a pretty good job in Minnesota. And education has been a key component in ensuring that we have the capacity to develop and to prosper. So we can't be shortchanging our public institutions of education. We can't be shortchanging our infrastructure, our roads and bridges, and our computer infrastructure and so on. We can't be shortchanging our research facilities. And I also see our society, our job is partly not just to be a partner in this, but to also build bridges across the generations, not just bridges across rivers, but across the generations, ensuring that our children are well educated. And one thing that we haven't talked about today yet is long-term care for our seniors. And I think this should be a top priority issue for us in this session as well, making sure that we have and generate the resources necessary to provide good quality care for our seniors, and to also address the issue of making sure that we have options that are available for seniors when they come in need of these long-term care services. And we've got the baby boom generation fast approaching those years when they're going to be in need of these services. We need to get out ahead of that. And if we don't, it's going to be a real problem for us in the future if we're trying to deal with it after the fact. So I think that we need to put that on a top priority as well. And again, build the bridges across the generation. They, after all, provided us with the education that we have received. And they provided us with an outstanding infrastructure that has enabled us to be a state that's number one in so many areas. And we want to carry on that tradition here in Minnesota. And so I guess that's the last thing I would leave with, is that we need to make sure we continue making those investments, make sure we make wise investments that is going to pay us big dividends in the future, both economically and culturally.
Thank you very much. And I hope you all heard that they would like your comments. Please contact them. You can find them on the web with the Minnesota Legislature. Their photographs are out there, email addresses, websites, phone numbers, any way you want to contact him. You'll even take paper, I'm sure. And the League of Women Voters is going to ask you to come back later in the session, perhaps more for an update on what is happening and our comments on that. With that, this session is closed. I would appreciate it if you would thank our legislators. And I thank all of the people that came out on this somewhat blustery day. We really appreciate the crowd we have today. And keep in touch, and you will find out when we will have our next session. Also, thank you to the league workers that worked today. Thank you to Globe University for hosting us this morning.
Good questions. Yeah, they're working. So, all right.
Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Les.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent.